annual international lecture. For this time, it is regarding Revolusi, Indonesia, and the birth of the modern world. Before we begin to our main event, I would like to invite the chair of Jentera, Mr. Arya Suryudi, to share with us the opening remarks. For Mr. Arya Suryudi, please come to the podium. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Mbak Vio. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Mr. David Van Reybrouck. Welcome to Jentera. Pagi, good morning also Pak Arif, our founders, ladies and gentlemen, extended family of Indonesia Jentera School of Law, and also history lovers attending this morning. It is a great honor for Indonesia Jentera School of Law to host a very special event, a lecture of the monumental book for us, actually. The Revolution, Indonesia, and the Birth of the Modern World. I would like to extend my warmest welcome to Bapak David Van Reybrouck. Welcome to Jentera, to Indonesia. Your presence today is a recognition of the importance of narrative you have presented in the book. Revolution is not simply a historical account of Indonesia's struggle for independence. This is an internationally acclaimed work, a profound narrative that positions the 1945 proclamation as one of the defining dramas of the 20th century and the birth of modern post-colonial world. Through hundreds of interviews and testimonies, Mr. David Van Reybrouck has given voices to eyewitnesses and survivors, stitching together the pieces of a complex and sometimes forgotten history. For us at Jentera, as an institution that strives legal reform of the nation's history, including the root of revolution, rights, and sovereignty, is an essential foundation. We often hear the saying, a great nation is a nation that respects its history. However, respecting history means more than just memorizing dates and names. It means studying, debating, and learning from the complexities of our past so we can understand the present and plan for the future. Books like Revolutions are a reminder that the freedom we enjoy today is the result of an epic struggle that changed the world. Respecting history means recognizing that our legal processes and nation building are deeply rooted in that revolution. Now let us make this morning discussion as a moment for collective reflection. I hope this lecture will open new insights, spark critical conversation, and strengthen our commitment to continuing to advance Indonesia based on the values of integrity and justice. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Pak Arya, for the opening remarks. And our beloved audience, today we will have discussion with the writer himself, Mr. David Van Reybrouck, on Revolusi Indonesia and the birth of the modern world, one of his recent publications on decolonization. Mr. David is a Belgian historian. He is an archaeologist and an award-winning author, renowned for his works on decolonization and global history, and other books that have been produced beside the Indonesia history is Congo, the epic history of the people. He has this important and also interesting perspectives on how to write histories based on more on ethnographic engagement, in which putting the history on the perspectives or of the human that witnessed the history. So I would like to invite Mr. David to uh, the front. Thank you. And for 30 or 40 minutes further, we will discuss with him on his book. So good morning. Thank you, David. So why Indonesia? What makes it important for the global perspective to unpack the historical perspective of Indonesia struggling with decolonization?
Good question. I often got in the Netherlands. I am not Dutch myself. I am Belgium. I come from the neighboring country. And I said, like, David, why would you want to write a book on Indonesia? This was our colony, which is a bit of a strange reaction. But I was fascinated by Indonesia. I had written my book on Congo, a former Belgian colony, but I had done my PhD in Leiden. So I spent quite a number of years living in the Netherlands as an archaeologist. But my fellow workers, my co-workers, they often said, like during coffee breaks and lunch, they were talking about Holland and the Dutch past and the Dutch East Indies and the, the War of Independence. And I said, like, this is interesting, but I would like to know more about it. And the funny thing was, Theo, it was as if this important event in 20th century history was only remembered as national history in the Netherlands because it was the end of empire, the end of colonialism, and in Indonesia because it was the beginning of its independence. But as I started to delve deeper into this, and I said, but this is really interesting, even for a Belgian. This is more than national history. This is world history. Indonesia was the #1 country to proclaim its independence after World War II, just 2 days after the Japanese capitulation on August 15. And I really had to check 10 times different, first on Wikipedia, then in all encyclopedias. But is this really the first country to have proclaimed? And it was not something that was publicly known. Like it was like, yeah, we fought against the Dutch and the Gurkhas came, and it was a difficult struggle and proclamation, etc. But there was a little awareness that Indonesia was the first. And then the second thing was, not only was it the first before the Philippines, before India, but 10 years later, Sukarno very explicitly realized that the world had to learn about the Indonesian experience. And this is what the Bandung Conference in 55. So the proclamation in 45 was a world premiere, and the Bandung Conference of 55 was also a world premiere. And if you take that together, the conclusion is simple. Yes, this is relevant even for a Belgian, or for a Peruvian, or a Brazilian, or a Congolese. This is world history.
Perhaps your mic is not on.
You can hear me?
Because the audience from the Zoom cannot hear. Wait. You may use.
So I just gave a very brilliant answer, which you missed, and which I will try redo quickly. Why would I write a book on Indonesia as a Belgian? My conclusion is this is more than Dutch history. This is more than Indonesian history. This is world history, and it's even somebody from Peru or Brazil or Angola could have written this book because it's truly world history. Indonesia was the first country to proclaim its independence after World War II in 45. And in 1955, it was the country that told the rest of the world, look at how you have to decolonize a country. The Indonesian, and this is a part for those who missed my first part, this is a part I haven't said yet. So the model for how to decolonize a country, a colony, how to turn a colony into a country, the model was really based on the Indonesian experience. It had to be fast, it had to include the full territory, and it had to include all powers. This is the model that was part of the Perang Kemerdekaan here. Kemerdekaan 100% was the phrase. We need 100% freedom, 100% of the powers of the total territory of the archipelago, and it has to go fast. And this went very much against the beginning of a logic in the West. We're going to do it slowly.
We're going to do it partially, and we're going to do it perhaps just for a few powers and for a few segments. The Dutch, for instance, in the beginning with the Linggadjati agreement, they said like, okay, they want to be independent. That's fine for Java and Sumatra, but not for the rest of the archipelago. So what was really original about the Revolutie, and which I believe set the template for the rest of the decolonization movement, was this idea. This was, how do you turn a colony into a country, make it fast, make it all, and give all powers to the new elites. This is working now, right? The microphone is working. Yes, I'm
Okay.
happy.
Thank you, David, for sharing why do you pick Indonesia for the world to know the history. Now I would like to go to how do you collect the data,
Mm.
and uh, we would like to hear from you what are the stories during the data collections, because some of the participants here are law students. Probably we have different approach in dealing with uh, research
Yeah,
and how we collect data.
yeah.
And you previously mentioned before the event begin, he previously mentioned about him riding the online object. Probably it was the part of David collecting pieces also. Yeah, could you please explain that to us?
Yes, I'm not a legal expert by training, although I'm inspired and I take a lot of information from what legal scholars come up with. But I am trained as an archaeologist, which means that my approach to data collection is a very mundane one. I literally go down on my knees and I scratch the soil. This is what I was done as a training. And I think some of that um, methodology is still with me when I'm preparing a new book. I think for a country like Congo or my previous book or Indonesia, this book, a country where large parts of the population are illiterate, it means that their perspective will not end up in the archives. So the majority of people are absent from the official archives, which are colonial archives. And if they are still alive, and I had to hurry to interview people. I interviewed about 200 people all over Indonesia, but also in Japan and even in Nepal, because and in the Netherlands, of course. So I wanted to have a variety of voices and voices that were not necessarily already part of the archives. And I remember the very first interview I did in Jakarta was, no, it's more than 10 years ago now. It was in a home for the elderly, for elderly ladies. And there was this woman called Siti Aisha. She was very old, but I had heard that she had interesting stories to tell. That's the only thing I knew. So I arrived on my Gojek at the home for the elderly. I asked them, are there any elderly people here, which is normally the case in a home for the elderly? And then I said, like, and I'm especially looking for Ibu Siti Aisha because she was part of a military effort in Kalimantan. This was a woman from Java who, aged 14, had traveled to Kalimantan to go away from her family, which she felt very unhappy about. And she joined the Tentara Pelajar, the students' army. First as a girl, so she had to do the cooking and the washing and the nursing of soldiers. But very soon she became a combatant herself. And when I arrived in the home for the elderly, I brought some cake and I noticed that she was ill, and I said, like, it's too late. Perhaps my arrival is inappropriate. This is an elderly lady. Perhaps I should leave her quiet. And she was lying on her bed, but she started talking. And she started talking, and she became more active and more lively. And at a given point, she started telling about how she was walking through the rainforest in Kalimantan, and that they were sleeping on the ground, they were drinking water from puddles, they were eating from clapper nuts. She said, like, we were not afraid of the Dutch, we were much more afraid of the orangutan. And then, which was a fantastic anecdote already. And then she began singing a song, which they sang during the war. Now, this is information you will never find in an official archive, not in a Dutch archive, not in an Indonesian archive. So this is the riches of oral history. And so in the beginning, I started going to homes for the elderly in Jakarta, but then I realized not everybody ends up in a home for the elderly. I traveled around. I went to mosques. I asked imams for elderly people. I asked journalists if they knew witnesses. At a given point, I even started using online. I saw that everybody was on his telephone all the time. And at that point, Indonesia had the highest presence of Facebook accounts in the world, the highest density. So I post a number of questions on Facebook groups, but very little feedback. And then I decided in other social media, I started to use Tinder. You know, for those who do not know, Tinder is an app for if you want to have and drink a coffee. Um, and I made a profile with a picture, a decent picture, and I had a text in Bahasa Indonesia saying that I was a penulis dari Belgia and I was writing a book on the War of Independence and suggesting I'm actually more interested in your grandmother than in yourself. And I became the most democratic user in the history of the app Tinder, I believe, because I accepted everybody. Beautiful, ugly, male, female, nearby, far off, very young, very old. I accepted everybody, everybody, everybody.
Is it also written in the book
Yes,
about you being on Tinder?
yes, it is. It is in the book. It is in the book. And at the given moment, I had more than 1,000 matches. I thought, like, this is easy here. Uh, I also realized that not everybody is reading your profile text. And but actually in the book there are a number of witness accounts of elderly people that I met thanks to Tinder meetings, both here and in Japan. I used it in Japan as well. Then I had my text in Japanese, and I have a few witnesses were recorded this way. You know, I had to hurry so fast because I was looking for very old people. And in Japan, they get very old, but they don't like to talk about the war, which they lost. So I really had to hurry. And at a given point, I realized if I work at this speed, I will never get as old as my witnesses. So I really had to worry to be able to find this documentation. But I think it was worth it. It gave so many interesting perspectives.
Okay, thank you for pointing out um, the importance of oral history, because I also remember during our colonialization era, it was only the scholars who write for Indonesian history or the dynamics in Indonesian politics, but the people who are like general citizens,
Yeah.
We 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 really rely on sharing histories from mouth to mouth in the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
So this is depicts how Epic David collects data and also providing the narratives on the living historical witness
Yeah.
through your book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And could you please also share what are the interesting perspectives that you gain from uh, from the living witnesses that you discover?
Oh, the first thing you discover when you talk to people is that history is so much more complex than what you think at first. I mean, if you just have a quick glance at history, you would say like, well, you had the Indonesians and they had the Dutch, and they were enemies, and you tend to treat countries as units without internal divisions. And then the first thing you learn is how different perspectives were. When I was doing my language course in Yogyakarta in the Alam Bahasa language school, I started doing my first interviews with my language teacher. The first person I interviewed was on the countryside near Prambanan, and he had been Pemuda, had been a fighter, very dedicated, lived close to the Kraton, and he was very much in favor of the Japanese. And the third one I interviewed was in Kota Gede, and he was very much in favor of the Dutch. And I said, like, well, this is more complex than what they told me in the beginning, as if there was such a thing as a homogeneous Indonesian community. People had different opinions. Even in Indonesia, yes, there was a general longing for independence, but you have, and I talk about it at length in the book, you had different political ideologies. You had political Islam, you had communism or socialism, Marxism, you had the nationalism. And these three different movements existed, but there was also a lot of overlap between the different movements. The Sarakat Islam from the 1910s and 20s moved also into the Socialist Party with people like Semaun. And when the nationalist movement became important with Sukarno, it was not necessarily anti-socialist or anti-Islam. It was an integration. So it was really interesting to discover this variety of perspectives. But even in the Netherlands, perspectives were very divided. Half of Holland was against the war of independence. Parliament was deeply divided about whether or not to send troops. And so countries are not the best unit of analysis. And so my doing oral history is the best way to understand much better what's going on and to have a much finer, a much more intimate understanding. And you also understand why this person has done this in his life. Oh yes, if this is in his youth, you understand he becomes a torturer, or he becomes a killer, or he becomes a freedom fighter. So it was really interesting, both on the psychological level as on the political level.
Okay. In your book, do you also how do you write the narratives on the divisions um, of opinions in Indonesia? Whether so one of the debates that uh, sort of kind of race when we talk about Indonesian history is whether we are stronger more on diplomatic um, approach or more on the physical approach, combating the colonialization. How do you write this perspective on your book?
I think if you look at the events between 1945 and 1949, it's like a ping pong game between diplomacy and military aspects. And you see several attempts to reach a diplomatic agreement, very often bravely so. And then you see many occasions where violence comes back. And I have to say, I mean, especially with the what you call the Agressie Militaire Belanda, the two phases, it was clearly that this was Dutch initiatives, both police actions. I still dislike the word police action because it's such a euphemism for a military attack and a military offensive. The Indonesian word, the Agressie Militaire Belanda, is, I think, much more accurate than the word police actions, which is still being used in the Netherlands. But it is obvious that these were Dutch um, deliberate efforts to stop diplomacy and to let the weapons do the talking. And I'm still surprised. The Lingga Jati agreement, which had been reached in 1946, was a compromise that was a brave compromise. And I was very much impressed by what Sultan Shahrir and Wim Schermerhorn, the two chief negotiators. Schermerhorn was the former prime minister of the Netherlands. Shahrir was the prime minister of Indonesia, sitting together in the house. I visited the house of Lingga Jati. I actually even visited in the Netherlands. She died a few years ago. Joti ter Kulve was the girl who grew up in the house of the villa. It was built by her father. So I had the girl who grew up in that building in which the peace talks took place. That was a brave diplomatic solution. It was not the final solution, but it could have worked for a couple of years. But as soon as Schermerhorn went back to the Netherlands, the people in the Netherlands went crazy. We are going to lose Java and Sumatra. Schermerhorn has given it away. The government put new conditions. Parliament was making new conditions. People were so unhappy in the Netherlands about the Linkajati agreement. There was even a failed coup d'etat in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, just after World War II, there was a right-wing military coup d'etat that eventually took no place, probably because the Queen knew about it and she stopped it. But it showed to what extent part in the Netherlands were not at all convinced that the Linkajati agreement was the way to go. But to answer your question, yes, it was an alternation between diplomatic phases and military phases. And last night I arrived only 2 days ago in Indonesia, in Jakarta. And last night I spoke in the Canisius College. And in the audience on the first row, there were two elderly ladies. One was a daughter of Mr. Hatta, and the other was the daughter of Mr. Roem. And Roem is obviously the chief negotiator. He had been part of the Linkajati negotiations, the Renville negotiations, and then the von Royen agreement. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, the questions are coming actually from the Zoom comments, and after this, I will have the audience as well in the room to provide questions or discussion if you want to share as well. Uh, Probably the last one from me. Uh, how do you see the efforts to reclaim our liberty in in the modern era of Indonesia? What are the aspects that are do you think prominent uh, in the modern day that was shaped by our historical uh, by the history of our decolonization?
You mean today? Thank you very much.
Yes, today, or at least after the New Order era.
I arrived with a bit of a cold from the winter in Europe. I think the longing for freedom has been a constant feature of Indonesian history, and it's been very much a shared longing. And what strikes me, and I think it's rather unique, is the enormous political importance of the youth. It was there already during the Japanese times. It was there during the times of the Revolution and the period 45, 49. You also see it with the Reformasi and the end of the Suharto regime. And even now, there was a very good piece in Jakarta Post this morning on the role of young people in the civil unrest and the contestations across the world, but also in Indonesia. But reference was also made to what is happening in Madagascar, in Nepal, in Morocco. But there is really a strong Indonesian tradition of young people who are not underestimating their political force. This is in stark contrast to my country, to my part of the world. When Greta Thunberg spoke to the world stage, the overall reaction was, she's just a kid. We don't have to listen to her. She'd rather go to school. I mean, that was like the overall reaction. Whereas here, and I think if Europeans have to learn one thing about the Indonesian history, it is the incredible power of young people and also especially young women. The revolution was not just made by young men. Yes, they did the large part of the fighting, but there were female combatants, there were female activists, there were female supporters. So it's really interesting to see this sort of um, drive of young people, male and female, to bring about change. And that, for me, is a defining feature of the longing for freedom and the project of freedom in this country. And I think we should inspire the world as we know it.
Thank you, David, for pointing this out. And especially, I really appreciate that in writing the history, you are using uh, the intersectional approach to capture what happened during the colonialization, and the history does not only um, was not only claim or belongs to the senior group only, but also there are efforts from the youth in intersectionals uh, uh, aspect. And after this, I would like to open the discussions for this forum. Uh, if any of the audience would like to ask questions or would like to share, please, yeah, please, Bu Natalia. Uh, yes.
Take a couple and then group them together.
Okay, sure. Anybody else? Anyone? Please, please introduce your name and the discussion.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Julianto Muhammad Ramadan Santoso. I'm from Jentera. I'm a student. So my question is, if Indonesia Revolution is considered a turning point for the modern world, could it be argued that the world has no interest post-revolution stagnation, where freedom no longer comes from struggle but from control through technology and economy? And if the modern world was born from revolution like Indonesia, do today crisis, climate collapse, inequality, surveillance represent the that they represent the adulthood or decay of December? That's my question.
Okay. Anyone in the room? Okay, this will be the last question from the room, and we will have another session after you answer the question.
Thank you, David. I'm Irfan Fauzan. I'm student at Jentera Law School. So, our founding person reminded us that the independent days of Indonesia was a golden bridge. Uh, the golden bridge towards the true liberation of Indonesian people. Or in legal language, the independence of 1945 was a legal formal independence, but the true purpose was to enable substantive freedom, or what I said, a human emancipation of the Indonesian people itself. However, one of the primary threats to achieving this substantive freedom is what Sukarno referred to as neocolonialism or and neo-imperialism. Neocolonialism is a form of domination that no longer operates through direct military occupation, but rather through structural, economic, and political mechanism imposed by the Western powers country on global South country. So in this reality, this is the question: to what extent can one can say that the 1945 Golden Bridge has not really achieved its goals in Indonesia today? Yeah, for example, in Papua, let's say, Papua is Papua is for decades control one of the Freeport for decades control one of the richest gold and copper reserve. But despite generating vast revenue, much of the wealth flows abroad, while the local communities suffer from poverty, ecological destruction, militarization, and so on. So the question is the Golden Bridge has achieved the goals, or we are the young people can, to what extent can we think that maybe Indonesia need another revolution? Thank you.
So you may answer the question.
Thank you for these questions. How did people in the Netherlands react to the book? Actually, very well, as it became a bestseller. To my surprise, you know, if you write such a book as a Belgian about your neighboring country, it's uncertain how people will react, but it has been extremely well received overall. Although some people were less happy with it, some of the veterans had issue, and some of the Indo-European part. I remember, for instance, when I once said in an interview I was going to write a book on the Dutch East Indies, on Indonesia. I got a comment from Gert Wilders, who is the right wing populist, who has also who is Indo-European. He has one of the reasons people always the reason why his hair is so blonde is that he doesn't want to show he's Javanese or how Javanese. Yeah, he dyes his hair blonde. He's not blonde. He's not a natural blonde. He's absolutely a fake blonde, and so some people in the European community, which is a very vast community and is very diverse as well. There is an extreme right-wing part, and they think that you should only praise what the Dutch did, and you should not be critical about the military atrocities that were committed by the Dutch. But overall, the book has been very well received. And then your question about was it a turning point? I didn't. Was one aspect I didn't get. Did you mean a turning point back then, and now there's a turning point in terms of climate collapse? Could you elaborate your question a little bit? I get it. Yes. I think it's a very good question. I think that the notion of freedom has changed between 1945 and now. Back then, freedom meant political freedom. And the hope was if you seize this political independence, you will be automatically free. Now, today we see, even if you are independent, there are other powers that supersede the political power. I think about 30 years ago, if you asked for what are the 100 richest organizations in the world, it was all countries. If you ask today for what are the 100 most rich organizations in the world, there's only 30 countries and 70 are companies. We are living in an age where companies are becoming more powerful than countries. Perhaps not yet Indonesia because you're such a big country, but there's something really happening. There's a corporate takeover. There's a risk of corporate takeover. And if you look the debates on what Google is doing with your data, what Meta is doing to your data, what OpenAI is doing, there is our freedom is no longer strictly protected by national law, by being politically independent. Our freedom, which you got in 1945 and my country also from the Dutch in 1830, we both come from countries that got their freedom from the Dutch, basically. that freedom is once again jeopardized by these technological revolutions, by the ecological collapse to which you referred. How free can you be as a country if you are undergoing the dramatic effects of climate change? And many of the countries which are not responsible for climate change are the first victims of it. Look at Bangladesh, look at Pakistan, look at Indonesia as well. So these are, for me, really, really different challenges, and it ties into the last question actually, which is the Golden Bridge, 1945. Was it effectively a golden bridge to political freedom? Yes, it was back then, but political freedom does not necessarily entail substantial freedom or experienced freedom. And this country has been doing fairly well. My previous book was on Congo. Congo got independent in 1960, but people are less free in Congo now than they were in 1960. So there's even been a reduction of their freedom because the economic stress is terrible, the ecological stress is terrible, the heat is having a massive impact on the country. So you're quite right that the freedom building project is never quite finished. And you refer to neocolonialism, which is not an occupation by a foreign force, but a substantial impact. I think the dream of 45, which was celebrated in 55 at the Bandung Conference, was killed in 1965 through American neocolonialism. The Suharto regime was brought to power through the CIA. And in the very same month, Suharto took power in Indonesia, Mobutu seized power in Congo in the same month. And they both stayed in power until the end of the Cold War for many years. I think they both came to an ending at the same time as well. And this is really strange. The role of America is so strange. America was the great defender of freedom, therefore the great defender of decolonization. Yes, these countries should no longer be under the yoke of European colonialism. They should be free. But the moment they were free, there was this hysterical fear. I really have to use the word hysterical, that these newly independent countries were going to become leftist and communist. And in the 1950s America, with people like Dulles and Dulles, the two brothers, there was, and McCarthy at the domestic front. Dulles and Dulles were reborn Christians. And for them, communists were not dangerous military or economically, but religiously. I mean, it was an ideological battle. And so what has happened with the spirit of Bandung between 1955 and 65 is basically America saying, we wanted you to become independent, but you were not allowed to become progressive. And therefore, we are going to install military dictatorships wherever we can, from Chile over Congo to Indonesia to Bangladesh, etc. So this is a tragical part of America's history, and for you, this is familiar territory. In Europe, it's only now that we feel betrayed by America. I mean, only the last year we've seen that this was our ally, and all of a sudden we have to pay more for NATO for less protection. And so we now Europe is undergoing the American treatment like the global south has already experienced it for many, many decades ago.
Thank you, David.
I know I need some tea. Yes.
Sure. I will still share a room for the audience here to ask for questions and discussion, please. Anyone? Okay, please.
Hello, good morning. My name is Saldi. I'm a student here. First of all, thank you for coming to our school. But I will ask you in Bahasa Indonesia so all of people will understand what I'm saying. Pertama saya tidak apa-apa. Saya tertarik untuk menggali lebih jauh soal metode oral history. Kebetulan saya sangat tertarik dengan pendekatan hal tersebut. Tadi saya senang sekali David sudah menyampaikan soal interseksi interseksi dalam proses penelitiannya. Nah, pertanyaan saya lebih pada bagaimana memastikan bahwa ini hanya tidak Jawa sentris dan juga Sumatera. Apakah Indonesia Timur juga terwakili dalam proses tersebut? Karena tadi perempuan sudah disampaikan gitu ya. Mungkin pertanyaan itu yang paling saya ingin tanyakan. Terima kasih.
I will translate the question for you. So he is interested with your methods in the oral approach. He wants you to explain more on the method, and also regarding the intersectional approach on the process. He would like to know if it is representative enough to see the perspective, not only from the Java centrist or Sumatra centrist, but how do you capture the perspective from the East Indonesia?
Thank you.
Okay. Other question? Yes, please, ma'am.
Thank you, Professor Raybrook. I would like to know your opinion or your analysis on the Asia Africa Conference in 1955. Was it a pipe dream, a lovely dream that was doomed to fail, or how do you look at it now in today's context? There was a historian in August, for the 17th of August celebrations. He was talking to a group of people, and he noted very decisively that Indonesia today, this year, we're celebrating 80 years of our independence, but we're not celebrating 70 years of the Asia Africa Conference. So he was thinking in geopolitical terms, but also from the Indonesian perspective. Was it a failed romantic pipe dream? Or do you think that it was never going to go anywhere? Thank you.
Other question? I will have one more question. Okay, please.
Maybe part of my question already answered by you. I would like to say that yes, Indonesian revolution is very important. 2 weeks after our revolution, that's the Vietnamese revolution starting. Vietnamese had to fight another 30 years until they got their independence. They got their independence in 19. They start fighting in 1945, get rid of the France in 54, and then fighting the American until 1975, and then fight for the embargo until 1995. So Vietnamese struggle for independence, it's much more inspiring for the whole world, much more than Indonesian struggle. Indonesian struggle, yes, there's Linggarjati, 46, and then there's Renville, 48. And then the real struggle is only December 48 to Rumroyen, May 49, 6 months. We only do the struggle in 6 months. Not very inspiring. Yeah. And then when we got our independence from the Konferensi Meja Bundar, we have to pay for all the war. So I don't understand why you look at our revolution as an inspiring event in the world history. Vietnam is more inspiring. Algeria more inspiring. Congo more inspiring. And China, look at China. So Indonesia is nothing in the world history. Yes, Bandung is a big event, 1955. 10 years after that, all the Bandung generation disappeared. Nkrumah disappeared, Skotore disappeared. the guy from Yugoslavia, Tito. Yeah, Tito. All the Bandung 55 disappeared because, like you said, the tragic history of Americans. They train the military, they train Indonesian military, thousands of Indonesian military after 1960s and 1965, they take over. You read the Jakarta Method, right? Yeah. So Jakarta Method explain what happened in Indonesia and how it influenced what happens in the world. So that's the first I would like to have your comment. My second is this one. The first book writing from the non-Netherlands is George Cahin book. George Cahin, Nationalism and Revolution in Indonesia. And in his last chapter, he wrote a very, very promising ideas, vision about Indonesia. And when some of Indonesian activists come to Cornell and ask him, how do you write such a promising? And then look what happened in 65. How Cahin can be so wrong about Indonesia. He didn't give a definite answer. I think he's still processing what's happened in 65. And our discussion is in 1995.
Have you ever been able to ask him the question,
Yeah.
to George Cahin?
Yeah,
So
I
what,
asked Cahin.
what was his answer?
No answer.
No answer.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And one of question I asked him after the second aggression, Nasution would like to have 50,000 military. And then I said, how is it possible you can fight the Dutch 100,000 Dutch battle tested Dutch with 50,000 Indonesian? And his answer is, you should ask Nasution one.
What was his answer?
You should ask Nasution.
Nasution.
I think George Cain is still processing what the hell is wrong in Indonesia. So you write so many good things about Indonesia, and we in Indonesia live under the 30 years of military dictatorship, the worst in the world. So maybe 30 years from now, somebody will ask you, how can you be so wrong about Indonesia? Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have one last question in this batch, David. In your book and also from the perspective of the witnesses you interviewed, do you already see the pattern of militarism in their perspectives? Because as he mentioned previously, we have been under the military dictatorship for 32 years after our independence, and also now it seems to be back to the old regime, in which you already know that our current president has the military background and also has uh, uh, critical historical background on the gross human rights violations. Uh, so this will be the second batch of the questions. I will let you answer the questions, and the audience are really interested in your book, and have coming we have questions coming from Zoom and in the room. So uh, if it won before 11, uh, I will open another session for questions if you don't mind. Sure.
Thank you very much. And I will perhaps start with your final question. This new militarization. You know more about it than I do, but I found it very worrying that after a couple of years of democratic progress, you now see an increasing tendency of giving civil powers to military authorities. Um, Again, what I read in the newspaper this morning confirmed that fear. there's this very big government, but a concentration of power in a number of very loyal people close to the presidency. I think that's problematic. And I share what the gentleman just said at the beginning, that the 30 years of dictatorship have been absolutely gruesome for this country and have been a horrific period, which started off with incredible violence. In the Netherlands today, there are still people living there as refugees of what happened back then. So absolutely. But the fact that 65 happened does not mean that 45 was meaningless. And there I tend to disagree. I think the historical importance of 1945 is really valuable. And it's true, Vietnam, very long war, very long conflict, but already very well-known conflict. How many movies in America and Hollywood have been made about Vietnam? Every week. But not a single movie has been made about Indonesia. Indonesia is this massive country, the fourth biggest country in the world, the first to proclaim independence, and nobody knew about it. Don't underestimate, in the West, in America, in Europe, nobody really realizes how big Indonesia is. The classical joke is, where is Indonesia? Yeah, somewhere near Bali. That's the joke. And how important and how original this was is often underestimated. Now, when it comes to the first question on oral history and intersectionalism, I don't like the word intersectionalism. It sounds very technical, but I now understand where intersection is just American English for crossroads, and intersection is where two different axes meet, where, for example, being male or female, or being white or non-white, and so the intersection is where women of color all of a sudden have like a double disadvantage in terms of symbolic capital. My way to deal with this when doing oral history is to make sure to have a diversity of perspectives. It would have been very easy for me to do all my research in Jakarta or just in Java and just to talk to elderly men. It would have been very easy. And these are the people who often already have witnessed and they have stories and they know what to tell. But I found it more interesting to travel to the Togian Islands in the north of Sulawesi, near Gorontalo, which was a very long journey to get there, very remote islands in Sulawesi. And then I talked to this very old lady and she said, like, but why do you want to talk to me? I have nothing to tell. I've just been a farmer. I've just been, picking coconuts and selling them for copra. I've spent a life outside of world history, so to speak. Now, the very best witnesses, every time I write a book, the very best witnesses are the ones who consider themselves to be the worst witnesses. And very often it's more women than men. You very often have men who really want to talk to you because they have incredible experiences, and then you realize they haven't got any story to tell. And then very often the ones who said, like, but I'm not that relevant, are very often are women. And then you sit down and you talk for 4 hours and you realize that the Wall Street crash of 1929 was even felt in the Togian Islands a few months later, when the prices of copra were plummeting and fabric was becoming impossible. She did not know it was related, but I asked her, when was the most difficult time of your life? Ooh, it was in the 1930s. It was impossible to sell copra. So that is really interesting. So how do I deal with the danger of only talking to the classical type of witness, is being very aware of that. Talk to people who think they don't have anything to say. These are your best witnesses, always. The Bandung Conference, very good question, and a failed romantic dream that remained in the pipeline. It's a good question. The Bandung spirit was killed from the outside by the CIA, but it was also weak from the inside, by fairly weak organization afterwards. At the end of the Bandung conference, no permanent secretariat was established. No budget was created. No permanent institution was crafted. It was a one-time event that brought together a sort of synergy of lines and political projects and incredible individuals, but there was no institutional follow-up, which weakened it. But this being said, and I think this is really important, even if the Bandung conference did not prepare for a follow-up, there was an institutionalization, and it is what happened a few months later at the United Nations. Bandung was April 55. In September 55, the UN all of a sudden had a whole range of new members. And they were very often the former participants of the Bandung conference. So Bandung was not institutionalized in a second Bandung conference. It was institutionalized in the transformation of the United Nations, which all of a sudden, the United Nations were set up just after World War II as a very Western institution. It was only after Bandung it became a truly global organization. So in that respect, I think Bandung had this effect. And in the early 1960s, for the first time, you had a UN Secretary General who was not Western, U Thant from Burma, from Myanmar. He was the first non-Western Secretary General. So in that respect, you can see, and the first president of the General Assembly was a man from Ghana, where Nkrumah came from. So you see that thanks to Bandung, there has been a transformation of the United Nations. And you have also the non-aligned movement with Tito, etc., which had a dynamic of its own. But for me, the real result of Bandung, in my book, the very last image in my book is a map I had made with a cartographer to show the transformation of the United Nations after Bandung. And that for me has been really interesting.
We will go through the questions from Zoom first. Uh, there are already 5 questions coming, and I divided the section into 3 types of issue. First of all, it is regarding the event back the historical Indonesian historical event from Nurjana. Nurjana, yeah, uh, a student from Jentera as well. She would like you to elaborate on the masa bersiap because it was sometimes characterized as chaos, and she didn't feel like there are many ways to describe the event other than the chaotic event. What can we learn from the event as a strategy that nowadays can be found across the world? And also another question from Dion. He said that he really enjoyed uh, reading the tale of Irawan Sujono, Evi Puterai, and other Perhimpunan Indonesia's activists, which has roles in anti-fascist resistance during Nazi occupation uh, of the Netherlands during the World War II. And he would like to know how do you see the relevance and intertwinement between the narrative of anti-fascist resistance involving Indonesian students in the Netherlands and the ensuing movement for the independence of Indonesia. Other questions are related to uh, Indonesian perspective and also the Congo struggles. So the questions from Ray Herfandi, one of our students as well, and Gita Putri, one of our lecturer, They would like to know experience from Congo and Indonesia uh, that can be taught in the modern world, and could the atrocities that happen in Congo and Indonesia can repeat themselves. And Gita specifically question about the colonial policy in Congo versus Indonesia, uh, and what particular aspect from history that shapes Indonesia and Congo outward and inward looking as the global South countries.
It sounds like they have a week to to talk about this topic. It's a very, very big question, but I'll be happy to give a very short answer.
Okay. And lastly, it's a question from Ahmad Ansori Basanta Yunasri. He would like to know your perspectives on the political importance of youth in making a change, and what will be the political barriers today, and how do you see the movement happening, especially in Indonesia?
Right. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the people who are following us on Zoom. I know it's easier to follow a webinar when you're live in the room, so thank you for your patience. The question on youth, I think I've already answered it somehow by saying that it's a critical political force that has often been underestimated, but now these last couple of months we see how important this is again. I'll go back to the first question on the Bersiap. So the Bersiap is the name given to the first months of the revolution, say between September 1945 and December 45. The situation in Indonesia is such like Japan has lost the war, but the Japanese are still in the country. They are being demilitarized. The Dutch want to come back, but they cannot come back yet. And therefore the British are being sent to do some monitoring of the civil unrest. Little do they know that young people in Indonesia at that point are really eager to fight for their freedom. And there has been an explosion of violence, and chaos is I think, definitely one of the words you have to use. An explosion of violence where everybody who is seen as a danger to Indonesian independence is a potential victim. And the Dutch themselves were still in the camps, in the internment camps, but the ones that were still free were the Indo-Europeans, because during the Japanese time they were seen as, well, they are still Asian enough to serve under the Japanese. The Indo-Europeans have always been this ambivalent category, and so the Pemuda in the Bersiap time were actually attacking. They were so afraid that the freshly proclaimed independence by Sukarno and Hatta of August 17, they were so afraid that this was going to be repressed that they turned themselves against anyone who could threaten that independence. And the Indo-Europeans were their most important victims. And there have been gruesome massacres perpetrated by Indonesian Pemuda against Indo-European citizens living in Java and different islands. In the Netherlands, for the group of Indo-Europeans, this is still the defining trauma for that group. It's part of a classical period of revolutionary violence, this explosion of violence, which is not commanded from above. On the opposite, Sukarno actually tried to stop them, tried to cool down, and in certain places was successful in calming down the masses, but the explosion of violence and the thousands of people killed there are a reality. The question was also, could this chaos be a strategy for today's political campaigning? I would hope not at all. I would hope that political campaigning today takes a much wiser, less violent and less brutal and less utterly blind course of action. This was an orgy of violence, the result of young people who had come out of 3 years of Japanese occupation, terrible hunger, terrible starvation, parents who had been lost at Romushas, sisters who had been lost as consolation girls. this was an entire generation of people who were completely frustrated. So let us hope that the Bersiap will not repeat itself as an event. A very interesting question on the anti-fascist movement. This was for me one of the big discoveries in the book. Indonesians in the 1920s and the 1930s who were studying in the Netherlands were among the most politicized and the politically most savvy people in the Netherlands at the time. It was the contrast was just amazing between what these. If you read what Mohammed Hatta is writing, for instance, as a 26-year-old against the prime minister, nobody in the Netherlands had such a brilliant analysis of what was happening. So here you have an entire generation that is politicized against colonialism, and all of a sudden they see the rise of fascism in Germany. And they decide, well, colonialism is bad, but fascism is even worse. So let us unite forces with our former enemies, the Dutch. Let us create strategic alliances with Dutch progressive forces, and let us fight fascism first. Our independence will come later. The oldest man I could interview for my book Revolutie was Jayeng Pratomo, Raden Mas Jayeng Pratomo, who came from Java but grew up in Sumatra. His father was one of the first doctors from the Stovia school. And he was 102 years old when I was interviewing him. And he died. I went to his funeral. The funeral was on the day of his 104th anniversary, on his 101st birthday. And he said, like, well, for us, it was so clear. We were against colonialism, but we were even more against fascism. And we took a long meeting, and we decided to fight fascism first. And this was a serious commitment. The very first group that joined the resistance, the Dutch in the Netherlands, were Indonesians. The Indonesians were amongst the earliest, amongst the most numerous. I think there were about 800 Indonesians in Holland when the Germans invaded. And I tried to make a calculated guess. About 100 of them had been part of the resistance. 1 out of 8. That's enormous. That's really enormous. And Jayeng Pratomo, I mean, he paid the price for it. He had a Dutch girlfriend. Both were arrested because they helped to escape Jews and they helped print illegal journals. They were both sent to the concentration camp, first in the Netherlands, and then he was sent to Dachau and she was sent to Ravensbrück. And in my book, I have the love letters written between the two of them at the end of the war. He is still in Dachau. She is still in Ravensbrück. They have both survived the concentration camps. And they say, like, okay, fascism is over. Germany has been beaten. Japan will be beaten soon. Let us now fight for Indonesian independence. This is absolutely an incredible part of Indonesian history. And for me, it was a big discovery. And thanks to the daughter of Jayeng Pratomo, I had access to the private family archive and I found incredible stuff there. Really relevant material. Yeah. And then, the big question on Indonesia and Congo, the parallels and the differences. I have time until 11 o'clock tonight. I'm not sure how much time you have. The countries are very different, completely different. The situation they started off was very different. Indonesia had a feudal society with a local aristocracy that was highly developed. Central Africa had been emptied because of slavery trade over 3 centuries. So very different starting point. But the Belgian king who colonized Congo took inspiration from the Dutch king. Like, how do you do this, colonizing some? We both come from a very small country and we have great ambitions. How do we do it? The principle of indirect rule, for instance, was really taking over from the Indonesian experience. Overall, you could say that the Dutch were better at colonization and the Belgians were better at decolonization. The Dutch already had medical care and inoculations in the 19th century, schooling at the end of the 19th century. The Stovia, first doctors came out in 1905, 1910, very early. In Congo, the first Congolese with a university degree was 1955, much later. And when Congo became independent 5 years later in 1960, the country had only 17 people with a university degree, 17, for a country the size of Western Europe. And they were not allowed to study law. They would certainly not have become allowed to study here. They were not allowed to study history or any or political sciences or social, because that was seen as controversial. The only thing they could study that was remotely controversial was psychology. So Congo had to start off as a country, again, the size of Western Europe, with 16 psychologists. Good luck. On the other hand, the Belgians were poor at colonization, perhaps better at decolonization. There was never a war of independence. The Belgians in 60, they had seen what the Dutch had experienced in Indonesia. They had seen what the French had experienced, you just referred to it, in Indochine and in Algeria. And they said, like, wow, our neighboring countries to the north have had a war of decolonization. France, our neighbor to the south, has had a war of decolonization. We will avoid this, and we will grant independence as if it was a gift. We will grant independence to the Congolese, but as a matter of fact, behind the scenes, they try to keep power on the army, on the economy, and on the government. And that is what gave rise to the conflict afterwards. So there was no war of independence by the Belgian army, but the misery that became after independence was largely created through the Belgians as well. So in some, two very different countries, but you have both been colonized by two very, very small European countries who thought in the 19th century, we are so small, we need something big, let's start the colony overseas. And it was misery all along.
Thank you so much, David. For the participants, both in Zoom and in person here, this will be the end of our conversations today. So I would like to thank David for writing the book and also uh, giving your time here and share your insight here with us today. And thank you for the participants for coming and your enthusiasm in conversing with us today. As the end of our conversation today, I would like to we would like to share a token of appreciation for you, David. And I would like to invite Mr. Uh, Arif Surawijoyo as one of the founder of Indonesia Jentera School of Law to give the token of appreciation to David. Please come forward.
Thank you. You have fun. Very useful information. Thank you so much. Thank you so much as well. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And for the participants here, we would like to invite you to take a picture together. Yes, outside we can take a picture in our famous mural outside. Thank you.